trying to piece together some articles for this week as the season gets underway, and I'm trying to compartmentalize and separate, all the frustrations that I think fans have about not spending money, not improving the roster over the offseason, and yet at the same time, thank God there's baseball and it's finally here, because as I'm sure you guys will talk about with Jared Diamond later, I don't really want to talk about labor negotiations and all of that stuff. So it's nice that we can actually get to games that count and watch young players try to make a name for themselves, and just all the crazy things you see over the course of 162 games. I think doing this this is my 12th season, and I've gotten to a point where I think I certainly understand fans' frustration, but I just reach a point, and this is usually around that point when you're a few days from opening day, where I just want to see baseball. I just want to see what Owen Miller can do and what Josh Naylor looks like when he comes back, and Stephen Kwan, and can Tristan McKenzie become a frontline starter. So I'm sure you guys all have questions about what the heck happened over the offseason and why this roster looks the way it does and why you should buy tickets to games. And we'll certainly gladly answer anything you guys have. But it's also nice to just know that 3 days from now, the Guardians will either be 1-0 or 0-1, and we'll have things to criticize and to talk about.
Mandy, how about your perspective?
Yeah, I think Zach hit on a lot of things. I think just for me, I take the approach that he was saying of just being happy to see baseball again, and not taking any of that for granted. And I know that this has been a frustrating process. I think maybe the first few months might be a little bit different than maybe the mid to end of the year, as we're trying to get through them evaluating guys that they've seen the last few years who haven't really worked for them the last few years, like the Oscar Mercados, the Bradley Zimmers, as they're trying to get an evaluation of them and figure out what is the next step for them in their future. And if they start going away from those options and getting younger, when you start seeing different guys like maybe Richie Palacios or Gabriel Arias, or different young guys coming up, I think that there's a level of excitement with that, because there's just so much unknown about them. And whenever you just have the hopes and the high expectations and it's not really known, there's a lot of excitement that comes with that. So I think as we get through the first early weeks of the season and you start going through those growing pains and start shuffling out where everyone's going to fall and what their futures look like, and we start getting into the younger group, I think it can get pretty exciting.
Just another question for you. Am I correct that both of you now can do face-to-face interviews and interactions with players as opposed to the Zoom fashion? That's got to be a big difference for both of you, I would think.
Yeah, just speaking at least for myself, it's been so nice, especially spring training, because that's just the time of the year that reporters benefit really the most, because not only do you get guys whenever they're more relaxed and there's the pressure of the everyday grind is not on their shoulders, and they can just sit there and they can talk a little bit more, and they know they're working through some kinks and not everything is life and death every single day. So you can get a little bit more of a relaxed environment with them, and then you can just start to build relationships. And so especially for me, I started in 2019, so I had that first year of being able to make some connections, and then everything went virtual for the next 2 years, which was really difficult to figure out how to continue those relationships over a computer screen. Definitely not the same. And so it's just been nice to be able to get back into that and relearn what the job is supposed to be, really.
Could you, nobody's putting any questions in the chat box or coming online yet. Please put your hand up or whatever, so I can see, because I don't want to monopolize this at all. But could you two talk a little bit about your perspective of the Guardians, shall we say, off-season strategy for player acquisition? There were a lot of rumors about them going after players not successful and then saying, in so many words, the hell with it, we're just going to go with younger players. Could you share some light with us or for us on what might have happened behind the screen, so to speak?
Sure. My understanding is they had a plan A and a plan B, and they were very polar opposite plans, and there was no in between. Plan A was swing a trade for someone legitimate who would bring tons of production to the middle of the lineup. So they tried to get Matt Olson from Oakland. They tried for Jesse Winker from Cincinnati. I think they thought they were going to get Jesse Winker from Cincinnati. It didn't happen. And had they acquired someone of that ability, they're not one hitter away from a championship. They are several hitters away, and maybe some pitchers too. So had they swung a trade like that, that would have been move number one, and there would have needed to be more moves. Those guys have 2 years of team control, so you would have seen more aggression. That didn't happen, and they resorted to plan B, which was don't spend money just to spend money. Learn more about these kids and just go that way. And I understand, believe me, I get it. Like, that's not what anyone had in mind. That's not what they had in mind, because they've been saying for almost a year now that they planned to spend money going into 2022 and to build back up after last year was basically a transition year. So that's sort of what happened. I think it's more magnified because of the way spring training was, where you had no activity for 3.5 months and then a flurry of activity in 2 weeks, and everyone's making moves, and Cleveland sort of sat on their hands. I don't think that's how they drew it up. I think they would have preferred plan A over plan B, but now you'll get another year where you're watching young kids develop on the fly, and maybe next off season they'll finally spend some money, swing some trades, and go from there.
Mandy, we got some good questions coming in the chat box. So let me ask a follow-up. Jose Ramirez and the status of that negotiation and how it plays to what Zach was just saying about how they would allocate their funds. And then we'll jump into the chat box questions.
Yeah, I think Jose Ramirez is a situation where everyone just sort of has to wait to see where they end up falling before opening day. I know it seems like opening day is so close, but that there's still plenty of time for both sides to continue to negotiate back and forth. Even Tito was joking today about how many reports have been out there that just don't really have any credibility behind them, and how there's so much talk going on in outside analyzation where it's something that we're just going to have to wait to see where they can get to at that point. And we don't really know exactly where they all stand right now. Obviously there isn't one, but it seems like they have the room to be able to talk numbers. It's just such uncharted territory for the organization, because they've never given out a contract that Jose Ramirez would be looking for. And so to think about the number of years and to think about the amount of money it would take to be able to get someone like that, you think about where their payroll is right now. And because they didn't do any off-season signings that were really substantial, other than like a $900,000 to like Luke Maley or small things like that, you would think that they have the room to continue to negotiate it. And I think that's why that both sides are still talking at this point.
Okay. So let's jump into the some really good questions into the chat box. First of all, the pitching staff was pretty dinged up last year, and how are they now? The spring box scores seem to be mixed. So either one of you or both want to pick that one up?
Sure. I think the biggest thing is it's just really, really difficult to judge where they are right now based on their box scores at this point, because when they're going into opening day, usually at this point, they have another 2 or 3 outings under their belts. And now they're at a point where each of them as of Thursday, will have only 3 outings in the spring. And so it's a little bit different. And usually those first 1 or 2, they're working on something very specific. They're not working with their full arsenal. They're not doing exactly what they would do in an actual game setting. So they're tinkering with things. They're trying to make sure their fastball command is there, whatever it may be. So it's a little different because they're not approaching it the same way. So they've had to get ready a little bit quicker, and starting the year, not everybody is going to be able to go the same way or the same distance that they would as if there was a full spring training. And so everyone's going to be in a limited pitch count, and everyone's going to still be building up. So it's a little bit different to be able to judge right now, but it seems like health-wise, referring to where they were last year, it seems like everyone's in a good spot. I know Shane Bieber was really, really happy with how his breaking ball looked yesterday, with how his shoulders felt all spring. Just the big things, the big takeaways. It seems like everyone seems like they're healthy and they feel ready to continue building up as we get into the season.
Okay, Zach, you want to add to anything there?
They better not be dinged up, because that's the lifeblood of the roster. And I'm excited to see what those 5 guys can do. You know, it's pretty rare when any team, even a team like Cleveland, typically has a battle for the 5th starting rotation spot, or maybe the 4th and 5th. And like, it was never even a question this year. We've known who the 5 guys were going to be since, I don't know, August maybe. So it'll be interesting to see just what they can achieve if all 5 stay healthy, because we saw glimpses of each of them last year. You know, you saw McKenzie for about a month or so dominate. You saw Quantrill post a 1.90 ERA in the second half. We saw Plesac pitch really well in 2020. We've seen Bieber obviously be Bieber. Savali was really good last year until he got hurt. So if all 5 are healthy, you know, who knows what they're capable of.
Okay, good. Well, there are a number of us interested in any updates on the minority owner. Storyline was hot for a while. It's the track seems to be cold right now. You two have any perspectives you'd like to share on a new minority owner and therefore obviously new cash infusion?
Yeah, so David Blitzer, I think, is on a mission to own every single sports team in every league across the globe. It's amazing. He and his partner are just involved in every single team that has a sale going on. It's still expected, based on people I talked to during spring training in the organization, it's still expected that will get done at some point, I think this year, but no one really has a timeline on it. These things take forever. You have to make sure so many I's are dotted, T's are crossed. But the expectation is that he or that group will become the minority owner pretty soon. And then in a few years down the road, they'll take over majority ownership. So nothing's changed. I think it's just, you know, we don't really know. There's no deadline here.
Okay. I asked you two about player access, and Ken jumped in and said, I have a friend and longtime sports writer who's been out there, and he said that access to the minor league complex has been severely limited, unlike other clubs, talking about the Guardians. Any idea what is or is not going on there?
Is that friend named Chuck Murr by any chance?
Ken will need to come off mute if he would like to answer that question.
I have a feeling it is. Mandy, you can go ahead.
Oh, all right.
I think you got your answer. It says bingo in the chat. So confirm there. No, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that especially the Guardians, especially, they have gone above and beyond this year to make sure that there aren't any setbacks whenever it comes to any COVID protocols. I know we're nearing the end of all those types of protocols being in place. And basically, a lot of clubs are really at the end, aside from sports writers having to, whenever they're in the clubhouse, wear masks. But other than that, I think that they've gone above and beyond to make sure that they're not going to be the club who's responsible for anything should it happen. And so there have been a couple extra steps to take before getting into the actual complex this year. So it has made it a little bit more difficult for access purposes, but they've been very thorough.
Okay, thank you. Well, there are a number of people on here tonight who are quote unquote Columbus Clippers ticket holders and fans. Who should they be looking for as prospects that might be part of the Clippers, at least the initial 2022 roster?
Well, you'll start out with Gabriel Arias at shortstop, who might not be there very long. He'll be in the majors at some point this season and has a bright future, I think. They really like him. He's been the talk of spring training the last 2 years. A guy I really like is Richie Palacios, who makes a ton of contact, high on base percentage, steals bases. He's a fun player, can play all over the place. I think he's got a future on the major league team. The thing that's interesting, if you're a Columbus Clipper ticket holder, it's the AA roster is just loaded. You've got George Valera, Brian Rocchio. The pitching staff is like probably better than the Colorado Rockies major league pitching staff. And a lot of those guys ended last season at AA, so they probably won't be at AA for long. So you'll get a look at them in Columbus, like Logan T. Allen, who's the better Logan Allen, a couple other guys too. So if you're in Akron, if you're in Columbus, I mean, there's a lot, even Lake County, a lot of intriguing prospects to watch. I know the major league roster is as young as it gets, but there's a ton of talent in the farm system too. So you might enjoy paying close attention to those guys as much or more than the major league roster this year.
Mandy, you want to jump in with any other names? One that's thrown into the chat box is from Dave, Tanner Burns.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a handful of guys. I think Zach said a lot of the names that I would have said. One that I would definitely add in there is Nolan Jones, just to sort of figure out where he's going. It seems like he's fallen off a little bit since 2 years ago, when it seems like that's all we could talk about when it came down to Cleveland prospects. And so I think learning exactly where he goes from here will be important for them. So I think he would be an intriguing one, because you just don't know, can he handle a transition to the outfield if Jose Ramirez does get extended? I think there's a lot of questions that go into that. And then just going on from that, like with Tanner Burns, I mean, he was somebody who I was out here during minor league camp before the CBA was agreed upon. So I was able to at least meet some of the guys. And like Zach mentioned, Logan T. Allen, he was really, really fun to watch. And the coaches just raved about him. Tanner Burns is another one that the coaching staff just seemed to rave about. And it was really neat during that time period, because there weren't many silver linings, because Major League Baseball wasn't happening. If there was any, it was the big league coaching staff was down here, and they were able to be at the minor league camp, and they were able to meet every single person. And Tito just thoroughly enjoyed being able to watch everybody. And it just seemed like guys like Gavin Williams is a little bit further away, but I mean, he just wowed every single person that's watched him. It was really neat to be able to see everyone doing that. So I think mine would be Nolan Jones, Gabriel Arias, and Logan T. Allen.
Are there any names of people that you would think none of us have ever heard of that you might say you ought to take a look at blank? Somebody, pun intended, totally out of left field?
During minor league camp, it seemed like Will Brennan, an outfielder, it seemed like he was somebody who has caught a lot of people's eyes. And I was talking to somebody in their player development staff, and they basically marked him as one of the guys who's flown most under the radar, one of their better hitters who hasn't gotten a lot of attention. And so that's the first name that pops into my head when it comes up with that. And I think Jake Fox is another one. He's an intriguing prospect. He's a guy who quit baseball from ages 12 till almost 16, and was just thought he was done with baseball, didn't like it. And his friend asked him to play in a summer league just for fun, and he fell in love with the game again and gets drafted out of high school. So, I mean, those types of stories are really, really neat. And it seems like he has a solid natural ability that will do him wonders throughout the minor league system.
Okay. Zach, anybody from your perspective? Thank you, Mandy. That was fascinating. Yeah.
Mandy, help me with his last name. Nick, what?
Michael Logic.
Michael Logic. Okay, I butchered it earlier today. He's a reliever. He's got hair that goes to his ankles, and you see him on the major league team at some point this year. He's had really good numbers in the past. Young guy, was one of the last handful of relievers to get cut during spring training. So maybe you've seen his name. I don't know if you could pronounce it, but he's one to watch.
All right. Well, Dave Bodemer had a very interesting trade idea for Bradley Zimmer. I'll adjust his idea a little bit just to say, what do you two think is in the offing for Bradley Zimmer in 2022? And I suppose you could throw Oscar Mercado in that same conversation. What do you two think?
I've never really understood Zimmer's place on this roster since the Miles Straw trade. Look, Zimmer has value if he's playing center field and he's your third best outfielder, but Miles Straw's there. You've got the superior defender and runner. He's better at everything Zimmer's good at. So if you're going to play Zimmer in right field, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. I'm surprised they tendered him a contract, agreed to pay him $1.3 million, especially given they have a full 40-man roster. It's given them headaches for weeks now, and it's going to continue to. So he's out of options. I would think he's got maybe the shortest leash of anyone on the roster. I would think that if some other team said, hey, we really need a backup center fielder, we've got a reliever for you, or we've got cash for you, or we've got coupons to Mars or Nico for you. I mean, like it's not a knock on Zimmer so much. It's more just like his skill set it's not needed here. You've got Mercado and Quan who can back up center field if you really need. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him playing somewhere else by the summer, but I'm sure he'll get opportunities early on just to, he's like a cat. He's got 9 lives.
Mandy, anything you want to add to that or let it go by?
Yeah, there's not much else to say. I think I completely agree with everything that Zack said.
Well, Dave, maybe your innovative idea of trading him for a graphic designer might have some fruit. Who knows? Stan, on a little more serious note, Stan asked an interesting question. Do either of you have a sense that everything in spring training is moving too fast? That's intriguing thought, Stan. This is a very different spring training. What do you two think about it and the rate at which things are happening, decisions are being made, at least temporarily decisions?
I mean, I think it would be maybe easier to answer that after a week or two of the regular season to see where they stand. I think maybe physically for position players, it's been fine. For pitchers, I think it is maybe a little bit too fast for getting ready. And talking with Bieber last night after his outing, he sort of made a comment about how this went even quicker than he thought it was going to. And it just seems like maybe they just need a little bit more time because there's going to be some even growing pains into the season with the experienced guys. And there's not many experienced guys on this roster, but with Bieber, Savali, Plesac, that rotation, you got to get settled in, and you usually have a little bit more time to do that. So maybe that did go a little bit too quickly. And for roster decision wise, I don't know. I don't know if they had more time, if they would have been able to sort through some different decisions or make anything differently, because they really try not to put too much stock in just spring training and what guys do in camp. They try to dig more into their background, look deeper into their resumes, so to speak, of what they're known for, what they've done in the past, what they've proven, and just see where they've grown from that. But they like to give everybody their fair shot, even in some cases whenever people may disagree that it might be a little bit too long of a shot that they've been given. But I don't know if it would have changed too much roster decision wise if it was longer.
Zach, any thoughts to add to that?
All I know is typical spring training lasts about 6 weeks or so. And to think that there could be another 3 weeks remaining until opening day is terrible. I think everybody, whether you're a player, you're a coach, you're a broadcaster, you're a media member, you hit a point, you hit a wall in spring training. It's so long. Look, there is not a single player in the majors who was upset that the CBA, I mean, they wish the CBA negotiations would have wrapped up sooner, but they were not upset that spring training was cut in half. So yeah, it's moving quickly, but I think in some ways it's a good thing. I think, you don't want to hit that rut where it's like a month into spring training, you still have 2 weeks left, and you're like, I can't believe I have to take a bus to Peoria today and go stand there for 4 more at-bats against some 19-year-old pitcher and then take a bus back. I mean, it can be brutal. So I think maybe it's moving a little fast, but I think most people would tell you they prefer that.
Okay. Zach, my friend, I do have to tell you that we got a little fence mending to do. Turns out we let a Colorado's Rocky fan in tonight, Roderick, and he's saying, hey, wait a minute. What about this pitching staff? So anyway, you and I have a little fence mending to do with Roderick after this is over. A little more serious. Dave Bodenmer had an interesting question about the baseball. Talking about there was work going on, or exploratory work going on, I should say, about I'll call it a tacky baseball. That seems to have gone quiet. Is there anything happening what is happening on that front?
I thought someone said they were going to put a special type of rosin or something behind the mound. Did Tito say that, Mandy?
Yeah, Tito said that there's going to be one for each team, not overlapping. You can't use the same thing, and it's going to be given from the league rather than it being. Usually, it's just you take yours out of the dugout and you take it out behind the mound and you throw it down. But now it's going to be specifically from the league. Each team's going to have their own, so it can be a little bit more monitored. And we've already started to see in at least Cactus League games already their new protocols on how they're handling, making sure that the pitchers aren't using any sticky stuff. They're just taking the hands, basically. They're throwing hands and they're just feeling their fingers, which I feel like is probably the easiest way to just check that. Last year there was a lot of hoops that they went through to check belts and having guys. I think there's a lot that they went into it. I think now just feeling the hands will be able to help them get there a little bit quicker.
Okay, great. Question here from Bob on were there any player or two that Cleveland refused to include at any offseason trade possibilities, like Daniel Espina? Were there any off limits players that they would never include in a trade?
So I think the two players closest to untouchable status would be Daniel Espino and George Valera, the outfielder. But this is not a team that, like, no one is actually untouchable. They'll listen on anybody. Valera is an outfielder, and they haven't drafted and developed an all-star outfielder since Manny Ramirez 16 centuries ago. So they would be hard-pressed to deal him. Espino, I mean, you're going to see him soon. I would think next year, but I mean, he throws 100 miles an hour and then has a really, really good slider and is getting a ton of attention this year. So those are two guys who they really don't want to move, I think, but they have so many middle infielders. You talk about Arias and Jimenez and Rocchio and Freeman and Tena, that they're going to have to trade somebody at some point. They know that. So it's important this year that, first of all, those guys have good seasons and that they maintain trade value so that whoever makes the most sense to trade, they can extract the most value from them, because there aren't enough spots in the lineup for all those guys. So they're going to have to trade someone, and I think they have some pitching depth. I think those are the areas you'll probably see them deal from. If not this summer, then next winter for sure.
Okay. Andy, your perspective there?
Yeah, I think I mean, largely agree with everything that Zach just said. I think the biggest thing is basically just taking this year, not only to just make sure that those middle infield prospects who are there continue to build that trade value, but it's also for the organization to learn who's going to be the best to turn to as they take this next step, because not only do they have all those guys in their farm system, but they also have Ahmed Rosario, they have Andres Jimenez right now, they have Yu Chang, they have Owen Miller, all these guys, and there's way too many. So you have to make a move at some point, and they're an organization they don't want to pull the trigger too soon on giving up on a guy and then regretting it, and when he goes somewhere else and find success. I mean, obviously sometimes that just happens with a change of environment, but they don't want it to happen because they made that decision too soon. So I think that this year will be an important year for them, especially with Gabriel Arias, to see who's going to be the middle infield moving forward for at least the next few seasons, so that they can lock that in and then figure out where they can make moves from there.
We got a question for your crystal balls. What do you think the starting 8 will look like for the Guardians on opening day? Whose crystal ball is less cloudy than the others, maybe, is the question to ask.
I can go. I guess you got a righty on the mound. This is not going to be a popular answer. I think Mandy posted it today. I think pretty similar to what you saw today with Straw in center, Rosario either at short or in left, probably left. Ramirez, Reyes, Bradley, maybe Chang at second, and then everybody's favorite Zimmer in right, Hedges catching. Did I say Jimenez yet in short? Personally, I'd love to see Stephen Kwan get a start. I really think that his hitting ability is going to be fun to watch. Guy who makes a ton of contact, hasn't struck out in 30 plate appearances this spring. But we know how this works. You'll see the veteran first, and you'll see Kwan play every so often, next week or something.
So, Mandy, are you good with that?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. Let's jump into the what happened to Oscar Mercado. Great the first year. What has happened since then? Will the real Oscar Mercado please show up?
I think that the biggest thing with Mercado is you could tell that maybe he hit a wall mentally coming off of that first season and really just struggled to bounce back. When he was in his rookie year, he never really had too many times where he struggled. I think it was like the end of July maybe, where he had like 1 week where he struggled and then bounced right back. But he never really had to go through too much of a difficult stretch at the plate, especially, and then turn around and try to dig himself out of it. So whenever he got a taste of that in 2020, it seemed like it got between the ears a little bit more, and he struggled. He got really in his own way to try to get out of that, and he has not really been able to find his way out, which has been difficult. And then we saw it translate out on the field as well. He struggled toward, I guess, what was it, 2019 at the very end with defensively when he would move around. I think he had like 3 errors in left field in one game at Citi Field. And there was some hiccups where he struggled to bounce back from, and it seems like it's just basically become a mental game at this point. And he's done a lot to his swing over the last few off seasons. He's been tweaking things. He's been working with their hitting coaches. He was one of 2 guys, I think Owen Miller was the other one, who actually met with Chris Valleca, their new hitting coach, before the lockout, and the couple days that he had to communicate with players before he was told he couldn't communicate with them anymore after his hiring. So he's constantly trying to work at it, but it's not something that he's been able to rediscover from what he had in 2019.
Zach, let me toss the next one at you. We got a lot of questions here. That's great. James Karinchak, do you see him bouncing back this year?
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be. I think he had like an ERA under 1 in mid-May last season. That might be a little lofty of an expectation. But the thing is, with him, you can draw a line and look at when they banned the sticky substances, his numbers suffered. But it's not like sticky stuff is the only reason he was in the major leagues, right? I mean, he was a great pitcher throughout the minor leagues and in college and in high school, I'm sure. And that requires actual ability. And so it's not like I couldn't just put pine tar on my fingers and start throwing 95 miles an hour as many times as I might have tried. But I think he'll be better. He's had a lot of time to figure out what went wrong, how he can fix things. They said this spring, the data that they use in monitoring these pitchers before they actually get out in games looked like it did the first half of last season. So that's an encouraging sign. They need to get him healthy. But I think he'll wind up being back in that setup role and being a reliable arm in a bullpen that needs them.
Okay. Ken has let me paraphrase Ken's question here. There's a lot of complaining about the Guardians not spending money, the name change, etc. And I think the gist of Ken's question, Ken, correct me if I'm off base here, is the club just hoping that this stuff is going to take some time to work through the system and to subside, and we move on to better things in the future? Is it just a waiting game that they're playing?
You're meaning to have the fans sort of get on board?
Yeah, exactly. At least that's my interpretation of Ken's question.
I would say yes, in a way. I know a Jose Ramirez extension would be something that would definitely be trying a little bit more to not let it just be a waiting game and allow the fans to come back and really be back in the organization's favor. I know that would be a big step forward. Do we get there? Who knows? Still a couple days left for them to negotiate that. But if not, then I guess it seems like that it's going to just be something where it does take a little bit of time, and hope that the high expectations that they do have from this farm system, which ranks well and is definitely has a handful of really talented prospects, but not necessarily at the big league level just yet. Hope that once we get to that point, that can then start bringing people back in, bring a level of excitement back to the team with the youth that is there and the enthusiasm that they will just naturally bring. But for the most part, yeah, it's might just be a little bit of waiting for everything to die down a little bit.
Okay. Let's see, moving again, lots of good questions here. Dave asked, thoughts of a humidor at each park. Will it make a difference in Cleveland?
So I'm far from an expert on this topic. I thought humidors were for cigars, but I did talk to, we have a nerdy data guy at The Athletic who knows all about this stuff. And he said, you should expect to see more offense. Whatever it does to the baseball, it should make it so that when it's struck well, it goes farther, I guess. And he said Progressive Field was a perfect spot for that. So I guess just expect a lot of 10 to 8 games. Although it's lineup, maybe not.
Okay. I was disappointed you didn't pull out the ideal gas law like they use for Tom Brady and Deflategate, Zach, and get into a chalkboard with us on that, but we'll let you get away with that. Question on the reaction of players and fans to the name change, especially from the player side. What are you two hearing? I saw what was posted in the Plain Dealer yesterday. They're all good with it. But what are you two hearing from the people you interact with, both fans and people coming to spring training?
I mean, from the player side, it definitely doesn't seem like, not to put it this way, but it doesn't really seem like it makes a difference to them. They just want to make sure that they're playing regardless of what the team name is. It seems like all of the guys seem to be excited about the new gear, at least. And every time they keep getting asked about it, they say that they enjoy it so far, and want to see like the regular season threads that they'll be in. But from people outside of the organization, fans' perspectives, it's been mixed. Twitter's never really a friendly place to begin with. So I think that it's been mostly mixed, but I think honestly, from my perspective, I was surprised by how many more positive remarks there were than maybe what I was initially expecting, because I thought it was going to be completely negative, because that's at least what I'm used to on Twitter. And so whenever I got here early in camp, I started posting a few pictures of the gear and things, and I was surprised by how many people said, wow, that actually looks better than I thought it would. This is starting to grow on me. So I'd say it's still been mixed, but there's definitely more positivity in there than I would have projected.
Okay. Bobby Bradley, what do we expect to see him doing this year? The question is, will he take a step forward and become that solid middle of the order hitter this year? What say you two?
I'm skeptical. Hitters with that profile where it's so boom or bust, it's really difficult to change that. He's always had a really high strikeout rate at every level. I don't think you can just recreate who he is. So he could be a useful big leaguer. I mean, we've seen like Jesus Aguilar is a similar type of hitter. There are others who have been those guys who hit 220 with 35 home runs. But for this lineup, this offense, I don't know. He's out of options. Josh Naylor seems like someone who might have a better shot of sticking at first base long term. And then you can see different people in the outfield like Kwan and Palacios and eventually Valera, Nolan Jones. So to me, like, I think Bradley will get a chance. I mean, they gave Jake Bowers until early June last year until Bradley took over for him. So maybe you see something similar this year, or maybe even a longer leash than that. But I don't buy someone with that profile as the guy that you want to pencil in at first base for the next 5 or 6 years.
Andy, do you share Zach's optimism here?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's just difficult because you sort of learn to not have the expectations too high with this offense after we've seen it the last few years. And what we've seen of Bobby Bradley, I mean, his numbers have always been those power numbers, but his strikeout rate, even through the minor leagues, has always been so high. And so there's always been a little bit, even from the coaching staff, when you're talking to him or talking to them, there's always been that, yes, but the plate discipline or just things like that. So I don't know if I can completely think that he'll be someone who sticks. And I think Zach said it best, that Josh Naylor, when you have him there, he just might be a better long-term option for them.
Next question, arguably the most important one, perhaps. How healthy is Tito Francona, and do you think he will make it through the season?
I mean, if you ask him, he'll tell you that he's day-to-day regardless, no matter what his health situation is. He's so much better this year than what he was last year or even the year before. And I think the biggest thing with all of the ailments that he's had to go through, and it's a laundry list in the last 2 years, you could tell that he wasn't quite himself. You could tell that he had a shorter temper. You could tell that he just wasn't nearly as happy. And he even said that this year was that he started to notice that he was short with people, and he's never short with people, and even his closest friends on the coaching staff, and those types of things. You could feel that whenever you were with him in spring training the last 2 years. And this year he's just been so much more joyful, and it seems like he's back to being able to thoroughly enjoy the game that he's been around his entire life. And so it seemed just from that regard that he's already light years ahead of where he was health-wise the last 2 years. He knows that there's going to be some time to go with his foot. The foot's giving him the most trouble. But as he'll tell you, he at least has 2 shoes on this year. So he's doing much better than what he was.
Zach, anything from you? Would you like to add to that? Pretty comprehensive analysis by our resident MD from MLB.
Very comprehensive. I'll just say, just looking at him, like, he seems to have more color in his face, and he's just like more relaxed and at ease. And I think maybe we didn't realize it at the time last year, but he didn't seem as carefree as he is now. And he's cracking jokes, and he's just sitting after media sessions for an extra half hour to just talk about whatever's on his mind. It's easy to look back and have hindsight and realize that he was really uncomfortable last year and was totally miserable physically, mentally. So it's night and day, and it's great. I mean, I think it'll be fun to see him back to normal, because the last 2 years in many ways haven't been normal, and he's been, not his typical self.
Yeah. Okay. We touched a little bit about Jose Ramirez, but a question came out point blank. Do you think that Jose Ramirez will ever sign an extension with the Guardians? And if not by opening day, then sometime later in 2022?
Well, I'd say it's now or never. When you get to, he's got 2 years of team control left. When that goes down to 1 year of team control, every agent is going to tell their player, don't sign, just play it out for 1 year, and then you can have 30 teams bidding for you. So it's important that they do this week, and they set a deadline for opening day. They don't have to abide by that if there's momentum toward a deal. But if there is no extension and it's July and this team is floundering, he's going to be the most popular trade target on the market. So I would say you better lock him up in the next couple of days, or it's probably never going to happen.
Agree with that, Mandy?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think Zach said it. I think the biggest thing is going to be the middle of this year. If they are really, really out of it, then you have to start thinking about turning the page and where you go from here. And we've saw what they went through with Lindor, waiting an extra year of trading him away. So I don't know if that will linger in the back of their minds of thinking, okay, let's try to jump ahead of this than what we did the last time and try to learn from that. So I agree with Zach. It's got to be now or never.
Okay. Question from Stan. Do we see any subtle changes coming from hitters going for home runs or strikeouts to quote unquote putting the ball in play and therefore more situational hitting with the being an answer to the excessive shifting going on? Either of you seeing any of that kind of hitters adjusting their style from power to situational? Hit it where they ain't, as someone once said.
I think it's more an organizational philosophy shift. We've established they've struggled to develop hitters, especially relative to how well they churn out pitchers. So they've, to put it simply, I mean, you take a hitter like Bobby Bradley, big guy, his body moves in a certain way. That swing is that swing. You're not going to get him to choke up on the bat and try to poke a single down the third base line. That's just, he can't do that. So you can't just teach someone like that how to make more contact and how to have a better eye at the plate. What you can do is take someone like Owen Miller, Stephen Kwan, Tyler Freeman, even Josh Naylor, Richie Palacios, these guys who have that innate ability to make contact because they have really good hand-eye coordination. They have really good grasp of the strike zone, good eye at the plate. So you can add power to those guys. You can't do the reverse. So that's why you're seeing this team draft or trade for hitters who can make contact, because you can always add power later. I mean, Francisco Lindor, when he was coming up, he was hitting a few home runs each level. And next thing you know, he's hitting 35 home runs in the major leagues. So you can add power, you can't really fix contact. And so that's sort of their new hitting philosophy. And we're going to learn pretty quick here whether it works or not.
Okay. Mandy, anything there from you?
No, and not too much. I think it'll just be interesting to see how adding a new hitting coach, I know that there's only so much a hitting coach can do. And it's really hard to evaluate their position and how impactful they are. But I think it'll be telling to see what he can do this season, having Chris Valaika rather than Ty Van Berkelio after we've seen the offense struggle for so many years now. I think that'll be the biggest thing, is just seeing that approach and having a different mind and different opinions and perspective being brought to the table to see if that just shift can help the offense a little bit more than what it had been over the last few seasons.
Okay. Our Rockies fan, Roderick, asked an interesting question. He said, was the real reason for no deals and standing pat in the offseason with regard to payroll possibly a maneuver to make things more attractive to the potential new minority owner?
I was told no, but a minority owner wants to make money, right? They want to invest in a good product. So having an off-season approach that ticks off the fan base and doesn't make the team better is probably not going to be more attractive. So I don't think that's the case. And I also don't think that they're overly concerned about the timeline on that. I think it's more just, where do they go from here? How do they build the best roster? And eventually that guy will come in and he'll pump a little bit of cash into the operation and everyone will be happy. But no, I don't think they were thinking too much about that during the lockout when they were trying to map everything out.
Okay. Zach, I guess one of us would like you to revisit the ideal gas law for a minute and said, I thought this was Jim. I thought they used the humidor to cut the distance of hit baseballs in Colorado.
I already said I wasn't an expert on this. No, I can only relay what our expert wrote about this topic. And maybe it's different in Colorado than it is everywhere else because of the altitude. I have no idea.
Would you like to jump in or would you like to remain muted on that one, Mandy?
Zach can handle all the science.
Yeah, he's our ideal gas law specialist. Okay, good. All right. Question on Tito Francona from Bob. Tito is a second generation Cleveland Indian. Does anyone know what he really thinks about the name change?
I mean, from every conversation that we've had with him, he seems genuine in the fact that he thought that this needed to happen. He has given every indication as to actually being genuine in those remarks and saying that he struggled with the fact maybe that there were people out there who may find the name offensive. And so he said, if there even is one of those, then might as well take this approach and go with the full rebranding of the organization. And so, I mean, I don't know if there's any other thoughts that he has personally, but everything that he said with us, it does seem genuine in the fact that that's what his beliefs are.
Okay. We, I think, have captured our questions. Anybody want to jump in and ask? You're free to take yourself off mute and ask if you'd like to ask a question.
I have a question.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Tom.
For Mandy. Mandy, I don't know if you remember me, but as the Cleveland Club of Washington had you speak to us at the Oriole game in 2019 at the Babe Ruth Birthplace Museum. And it was your first year covering the tribe back then. Now that you've got a couple of years experience, do you have any observations, thoughts as to what you thought you'd get into? Are you glad you're still there? And any other things you've learned in the 3 years covering the Indians? And as a side to that is, for those of us who started watching the Indians in 1953 and figured we had many, many years that they would eventually win a World Series, but now that we don't have as many years left as we used to, what's the forecast? Will the Indians win a World Series in the next 5 years? Beyond that, I can't predict I'll be around.
Oh, this is quite the question. Okay.
Yes, right.
I'll backtrack. I'll start.
Who invited this guy tonight?
I'll start from the beginning. Definitely did not expect to have to do things virtually. I can tell you that at that point. So no, I didn't know what I was getting into whenever we were about to just completely flip everything 180, that I took so much time in investing and trying to figure out what the heck I was supposed to do my first year, and then turning that upside down. And the next 2 years I had to learn, each season was completely different again. So it's nice to start feeling like this is a year like 2019 all over again, where I can settle back in and draw from those experiences. But no, to answer your other question, I'm very glad I'm still here. This is the absolute dream job. And so it's nice to be able to say that you love going to work every day, because I know not a lot of people can say that. So yes, this is still the same great job that I had at that point. Is it different than what I thought it would be? Yes, just because of all the unforeseen hurdles, but it's been a lot of fun. Now, in the next 5 years, winning a World Series, I don't know if I can promise you that one. Depends. I think we're going to learn a lot this year on what their young guys can do. And I think we can maybe in the next 2 or 3 years have a better outlook of where they're going. But at this point, it would be difficult to make any type of proclamation like that because the outlook for this season isn't the greatest to be able to base those types of projections on.
All right. Well, we still had a couple more questions, but we're going to have to leave them in the question box because our next speaker has come online. And Mandy and Zach, seriously would love to thank both of you so much for spending the last hour with us, engaged with us, talking about baseball in general and the Guardians in particular. You are welcome to stay and engage with us, with Jared. Or if you care to say, hey, I need to move on and do other things, that will be clearly understood. But we want to thank you again so much for spending the time with us tonight. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And Mandy, we hope this is the first of many interactions with us. With Zach, we've signed a long-term contract, right, Zach? So we enjoy his presence with us, and we hope that you'll want to come back and join us again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to have to hop off because I'm heading up to the front of the press box here for the game. But thank you guys all for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Okay. And Zach, thank you also.
I think you gave a long-term contract to the wrong representative of the Cleveland Guardians, but I appreciate it.
No, I think not, my friend. Thank you so much to both of you. And let us segue to our next speaker, the Jared Diamond, baseball reporter from the Wall Street Journal. And Jared and I had a number of interactions. Jared is also the father of 2 youngsters, about 1 year old. He said, Joe, I've got a lot of things going on in the evening here. And if you wouldn't mind letting me go last, it would be greatly appreciated. So Jared, welcome. I hope everything is good for you on the home front tonight. And we're anxious to hear your perspective on baseball, the CBA, the season that we're looking forward to starting this week. So I will turn the baseball microphone over to you. I will be watching the chat box. So the baseball microphone is yours to share with us as you would like.
Oh boy. Wow. That was quite an introduction. Yeah. I have twin boys who are actually having their first birthday tomorrow. So it's been a little busy. It's been let's say a busy year. I assume that year 2 will be much easier than year 1, right? That's how it works.
Keep believing. Keep believing.
Yeah, no, we're having fun. Although it has been weird. This is the first year I haven't been at spring training since 2011. So that's been a little strange. But after covering the lockout as extensively as I did, it's actually nice to have a break. Honestly, it's nice just to be thinking about actual baseball starting here in a couple of days. After everything that this sport went through, I honestly am kind of shocked that we're at this point and that the lockout is actually over and they're actually going to be playing baseball a full season. If you told me 3-4 weeks ago that there was going to be an 162 game season, I simply would not have believed you, just given how bad the labor relations were and have been really for years. I know a lot of people in this audience probably remember much more than me about the history of baseball labor relations, which have historically, of course, been terrible. But in my time following and covering baseball, they've been great. In 1994, I was 6 years old. I have a vague memory of the strike of 94. I grew up in New York, so I remember the Yankees were very, very good, and people were very disappointed. My dad and my grandpa were very disappointed when the strike happened in 94. But all I've ever known is peace and harmony and everyone getting along. That has not been the case for the last 5 years, let alone the last few months. So I'd be happy to talk a little bit about where things stand, why they sort of got to this point.
Please do.
So I've been covering baseball for the Wall Street Journal since 2013 was my first year covering baseball full time. The last CBA, the one before the current one, was signed leading into the 2017 season. It was December 2016 when they made that deal. And that was a very contentious negotiation. It came down to the last hour before there would have been a lockout. I think that deal got done around 11 p.m. The deal was going to expire at midnight, something like that. I wrote about, I think I used the word lockout in a story for the first time relating to 2021 in about November of 2017. It took about 1 year of the last CBA for it to become clear to anyone paying attention that it was going to be very, very rough 5 years later. And it was like watching an asteroid slowly approaching Earth, because it was very evident that the CBA that was signed leading into 2017 very much favored the owners, more so than most. The history of baseball labor relations, some of you probably know, is basically the players walking all over the owners and the owners losing a lot of ground. That's because for many decades, there was no union, there was a reserve clause. Ever since free agency started, Curt Flood, all of this, you all know about this, baseball players have had a ton of power, and the Baseball Players Union to this day remains one of the strongest unions in the United States. They're the model for really many, many labor unions around the country. But things have changed in the last few years. And the last CBA went very, very badly for the players. And it became clear very quickly when in the offseason between 2017 and 2018, there was a whole bunch of really good free agents that were not signed when pitchers and catchers were reporting to spring training for the 2018 season in February, when there were sort of mid-tier veteran free agents who were having to settle for one-year deals or even minor league contracts, the kind of guys that used to sign multi-year deals, get big money. So why did this happen? It's an interesting sort of dynamic. Baseball has changed dramatically, clearly. The reason it's changed so much is because a lot of the work that groups like yours do, that study the game, that research the game, and things have changed. Obviously, we've reached a point in baseball where, to some people who've been watching baseball for decades, it's almost unrecognizable in terms of the way the game is played on the field. As a result of that, the way that players are valued and evaluated has changed dramatically, of course, especially as it pertains to veteran players. We've seen time and time again in the last 5 years, teams very much valuing young players, and young stars have taken over the game. I talk to people who have worked in baseball for decades and decades as part of my job, and to a man, they tell me that there's more young talent, more dominant young talent in baseball now than at any other point that they ever remember. Guys like Ronald Acuna Jr. and Juan Soto and Fernando Tatis and Vladimir Guerrero, guys who are 21, 22, 23, guys who in the past would have been still in the minor leagues at that age, who are the best players in the game so quickly. Teams started to realize, hey, not only are these young players really good, they're also very cheap, because that's the way the system works. The baseball economic system for its entire history has worked very simply. When players are young, they get paid well below market value, with this promise in the future of free agency where you could go and make as much money as you could possibly get on the market. And there was always this, let's say, unspoken agreement that, yes, as a young player, you'll probably be paid far worse than you deserve. But when you're a free agent and you're in your 30s and you're starting to decline, don't worry, you'll be able to sign this big multi-year contract. Maybe you're being paid for what you already did more than what you're going to do. But that was sort of the deal. Teams sort of realized, hey, that's kind of a dumb agreement for us. And they started realizing, well, we don't need to pay players earlier in their career because we don't have to, because that's what the basic agreement says. And we also don't have to pay players at the end of their careers because they're not really as good anymore. So we're just not going to, and they're going to have to fend for themselves. And that's how we got here. players started feeling like, well, we're not getting paid when we're young, and we're not getting paid to the same extent we were when we're old. So what are we going to do? And that is why the players have been making noise about the way the CBA all the way going back to 2017, 2018. So it was a long 5 years, lots of fighting, lots of sniping. Then the pandemic happened. Did not help the situation. There was an entire half a season was lost, more, 2/3 of a season was lost, of course, in 2020. And it also served as a sign of things to come when the league and the union got together and said, let's make an agreement about how we're going to navigate the pandemic and how we're going to try to return to play. And about a week later, they couldn't even agree upon what the agreement they signed said. And they never even made a deal about how they were going to return to play in 2020. And Rob Manfred had to go in there and just impose a season against the players' will. It was only 60 games. There was a grievance that has since been settled as part of the new CBA. They agreed to settle the grievance over the fact there were only 60 games played in 2020, but it was very, very ugly. And that's why a lot of people, myself included, sort of foresaw all of this coming years in advance. So we eventually get to November of 2021. There is very little negotiation. In fact, there was almost no negotiation before the CBA expired, and we went into a lockout. And it was the first one, it says 1994, the first work stoppage in almost 30 years, which is incredible to think about. And I guess the question now that I and many people have is, what really was it for? Was it worth it? What was accomplished? Will it damage the game ultimately? On the one hand, you could say, hey, they're playing a full season. Does it really matter that there was 3 months of when there would have been trades and free agency that didn't happen? Because they're still going to play 162 at the end of the day. That's all anyone cares about. On the other hand, baseball received a beating in the public. People were angry. Fans were angry. They were angry because, like always, there's this perception among the public that all this is a fight over is billionaire owners fighting with millionaire players over how to split $11 billion. I'm sure if they gave us $11 billion to split, we'd probably find a way to do it in less than 3 months. Probably wouldn't be that hard for us. So that generated a lot of frustration. And what was actually gained by it? Who got what, and was it really worth it? Of course, when these things happen, both sides like to claim victory, but in a way, they're kind of both right in this case. And I see that question, and I'll address that in a moment. I'll get to that in 1 second. The players' primary goal with this CBA was, one, to get young players paid earlier in their career. They did get that. The minimum salary client was raised a lot. They created a bonus pool for young players who put up big numbers to get paid even extra. So if Cleveland has a young superstar who has a great season in his first or second or third year, he's going to get a bonus. So that's good. They made some inroads in the luxury tax, another big issue. Not an issue for Cleveland fans because the Cleveland payroll is about $100 million shy of the luxury tax, but for some other markets, this is a big deal. They made some inroads there where now we have seen this offseason teams spend more money on payroll because the luxury tax threshold is higher. We saw at the end of the lockout, teams like the Dodgers, teams like the Blue Jays, of course, the Mets, go out and spend a little bit more because suddenly they won't have to pay tax, or they'll have to pay less tax. Those are some new changes in the CBA as well. On the other hand, one thing the players really wanted was to try to curb tanking, a very big issue over the course of the last CBA. Teams like Houston, teams like Chicago, and now Baltimore, teams like that who have sort of blown things up, the perception that they're not trying to win, that they're more concerned with the future than the present. Maybe that's something that people in this audience can relate to, having watched how the last couple of off seasons have gone for the Guardians. That really wasn't addressed in the last CBA. There was the creation of a draft lottery. I can tell you right now that won't do anything to try to address tanking. There's not a single team in the league that really cares about the lottery. It's not going to impact any behavior. That's because the baseball draft is so unpredictable. It's not like the football or basketball draft where if you get the number one pick, you're basically guaranteed a superstar is going to help you the very next year. We all know that's not the case in baseball. That's not going to impact anything. So it was sort of a mixed bag. I think the question we're going to find out over the next 6 months is whether there was any long-lasting damage to the sport. That's going to be found out in the box office. Is attendance going to continue to drop? It has been dropping for years, even before the pandemic. How will TV ratings be affected? Are people going to want to go watch baseball on Apple TV Plus and Peacock and all these other streaming services that baseball is going to be on now? I don't think we know yet. We're going to find out. Baseball is hoping that the fact that no games were missed ultimately will allow people to sort of forgive and forget. I guess we will see. I want to address a couple of the questions because I think they're both very interesting. And I want to start with the second one. This question about how ownership has changed and whether the shift in the type of people who are baseball owners has impacted the industry and labor relations. The answer is yes, in a huge, huge way. For most of baseball history, baseball owners it was family ownership. The idea was to pass the team down from father to son, from son to grandson, granddaughter, and that the team would stay in the family for generation after generation. And as a result, owners generally had a vested interest in the long-term health of the industry because they wanted to ensure not just that their franchise valuation would grow in the short term for them to flip it, but that their children would have sort of a team that's worth inheriting and that baseball would be in good shape for them. That's no longer the case. The reality is new baseball owners tend to view these teams as more shorter term investments. They are bought with the thought process of I'm going to raise the valuation of the team as much as I possibly can for as long as I possibly can. And once I sort of see the wind blow the other direction, I'm going to sell it. And if I bought the team for $600 million, I'm going to sell it for $2 billion. And honestly, that's not really unrealistic. The cheapest team in baseball, and I use that term loosely, is worth over $1 billion today. Many teams are going to be worth $2 billion. We just saw the Mets sell for $2.5 billion. If the Dodgers or Yankees were to ever go on sale, I can't even fathom the price. $4 billion, $5 billion. The Yankees might sell for $5 billion. If they ever were to go on sale, there's no indication that's going to happen. But we see a lot more hedge fund guys in baseball, people that really view these teams not as public trusts, but as just another investment in their portfolio to flip. And I do believe that the lack of family ownership has created an environment where owners, knowing they're not going to be around to still own the team 20 years from now, 30, 40 years from now, they have less interest in what the long-term health of baseball is. It's more, how can we maximize our profits right now? And I think that's a problem. However, these teams are so darn expensive now that the kind of people that used to own baseball teams, they simply can't afford them. There's very few people out there that could afford a baseball team today. We're talking, you have to be a billionaire. You have to be, and often many billions, it's multiple billions. So it really has narrowed the pool of people who could even think about buying a baseball team. And it's an issue. It's absolutely an issue. As for rule changes, that was another question. Excellent question. Stay tuned. I'll give you a little sneak preview of Wednesday's Wall Street Journal, because I have a whole story coming out about this in a couple of days. I actually spent about half an hour on the phone today with Rob Manfred, pretty much exclusively talking about rule changes. There will be the universal DH moving forward starting this season. 9-inning doubleheaders are back. The extra inning ghost runner thing is back in 2022. They say it's only for 2022, will not be back in 2023. But I say that with a bit of skepticism because they said that the ghost runner rule would only be in 2020. Then they said it would only be in 2021. And now they're saying it's only going to be in 2022. So we'll see. The ghost runner rule is not in the CBA. So it technically does not exist after 2021, but they could continue to make annual agreements to continue it. We'll see. They say the ghost runner rule is back in 22 as sort of a mechanism to help teams, pitchers who are not going to be sort of built up to sort of prevent these very, very long bullpen games after a very, very short spring training. Other issues, sort of and I sort of consider those sort of the small potatoes. The big ticket items, the ones that really would have a big impact on the game, the ones that Rob Manfred has been talking about since literally the day he became commissioner. Because if you remember, Rob Manfred's sort of campaign for the commissioner seat was in part based on his commitment to making games quicker, making games more action-packed, to improving the on-field product. To this point, Rob Manfred has failed at that. There's no question about it. Games have gotten longer under Rob Manfred's tenure as commissioner. The reliance on home runs and strikeouts has only increased by a lot. The way pitchers are used has only become sort of more unrecognizable since Rob Manfred became commissioner. He had hoped to address this previously. He has been unable to do so. That said, 2022 is going to be sort of the last season, I really believe, without a bunch of things. One of them is the pitch timer. That's something that's been used in the minor leagues. Last year, when it was installed in single A, they saw a 21-minute reduction in the time of game on average with the pitch timer. They also saw an increase in contact, fewer strikeouts. They saw a decrease in pitcher velocity. There's been research done and repeated that has shown that forcing pitchers to work quicker makes it harder for them to sustain 98, 99, that insane velocity that we see today. They need that extra beat to sort of reload their weapon, so to speak, and force them to go quicker, reduces that velocity just a bit. It reduces the spin on their breaking stuff and increases contact. That's what they saw in the minor leagues. We're going to see it in the major leagues almost definitely in 2023. Another one is a ban on shifts, or at least restrictions on shifts. Of course, another huge part of the game today. The way it's been tested in the minor leagues, the way it would be implemented in the majors would be you need to have 2 infielders on each side of second base, and all 4 infielders must have both feet on the dirt when the pitch is thrown. So no more second baseman playing shallow right field, which we've seen now for a few years. The new CBA gives Rob Manfred the ability to essentially implement any of these changes with 45-day notice. So basically, if he wants to do it in 2023, he could do it in 2023. By all accounts, they are going to happen in 2023. Whether they get there with an agreement with the players or not, I don't know. I hope so. The players have been very reluctant to any sort of rule changes, these on-field things. But at the end of the day, this is sort of a fight for baseball's soul in some ways. We know that baseball's audience is aging. We know that baseball's audience is predominantly white, despite 30% of the players or a third of the players being non-white, coming from Latin America. We've seen a reduction in African-American and Black participations down to about 8%, 7% of Major League Baseball. At one point, it was as high as around 20%. These are all big issues. The fact that the average viewer of a baseball game is about 55 years old, which is the oldest of all the major sports. And there's reason to believe that part of that is that the product on the field is not grabbing people the way it used to. That maybe a Wednesday night Guardians Twins game doesn't need to last 3 hours and 10 minutes. I hope that some of these changes are made moving forward. I hear a lot from people, well, you must just not love baseball if you think baseball needs to change. I disagree with that way of thinking completely. I think if you love something, part of loving something, as much as I love baseball, is knowing when there's a problem and knowing when it could be improved. And the reason I want baseball to change, because I want more people to see in baseball what I do, what everyone in this room does. And that's not going to happen if baseball games are over 3 hours long every single night. If around 30% of plate appearances end in homers and strikeouts, if the athleticism of the players is not being showcased, people won't fall in love with the game the way that we all have. So I sincerely hope these changes happen. I believe they will. I believe they'll have an effect. How much of an effect, time will tell, but it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens. There's a question about expansion, and I will, that's an interesting one. So Rob Manfred has said repeatedly that his goal and his aim is for there to be 32 teams, matching the NFL and the NHL. Each have 32 teams. Baseball wants that. There's a couple problems and things that need to be resolved before that happens. Baseball cannot expand until two sort of problematic franchises currently are resolved. The Tampa Bay and Oakland. You can't really expand until those situations are figured out. The good news is the Oakland situation is on the goal line. This is going to be resolved one way or the other soon. Basically because it has to be. They're soon going to be homeless if they don't resolve it. The A's are trying desperately, they say, to get a stadium built in downtown Oakland, away from the Coliseum site, by the water in downtown Oakland, in the Howard Terminal neighborhood. They have faced a lot of opposition from local government. They've had environmental concerns, which in the state of California are very important. There's very rigorous environmental standards that must be met for a product like this. In the state of California, you basically can't get public money to build a stadium. They just won't do it. If you want to build a stadium, you have to build it yourself. I'm a bit skeptical that the A's will stay in Oakland. I think there's too many obstacles to getting this stadium built. They are openly flirting with Las Vegas. Las Vegas has shown a willingness to spend public money to build stadiums. They already have an NHL team. They have an NFL team. I'm sure if you saw in the news just this weekend or last week, there's a group that's planning on building a new NBA arena to try to attract an NBA team. Las Vegas really wants baseball. I think there's a very, very good chance we see the A's move to Las Vegas as soon as 24. But we'll see. I would love for them to stay in Oakland. There's just a lot of issues. The Rays situation is a bit longer term. They are locked into their lease in St. Petersburg at Tropicana Field until 2028. They can't get out of it. They're going to need a plan, obviously, before that. Their sort of cockamamie idea of playing half their games in Florida and half their games in Montreal was poo-pooed by Major League Baseball. That is no longer in the cards. So the Rays' choice is either they have to find a way to get a new stadium built in Florida, probably in the city of Tampa, not in St. Petersburg, or they need to move. The person who asked the question asked about Nashville. Nashville would be the most likely place the Rays would move, but I think it's important to remember that the current owners, do not want the Rays to move to Nashville and do not want the A's to move to Las Vegas. The reason for that is that Las Vegas and Nashville are very clearly, in the eyes of baseball, the two best expansion markets that they have. And they do want to expand to 32 teams. To get an expansion team, they get to charge an expansion fee of $1 billion or $2 billion or whatever it is, and that money gets distributed among all of the current owners. If Nashville and Tampa and Las Vegas are taken away by the Rays and A's, suddenly maybe the expansion fee goes down if instead of those markets, you're looking at an expansion team in Portland or Austin, Texas, or San Antonio or Charlotte or wherever that expansion team would go. So if you gave the other owners truth serum, they would tell you they want to build new stadiums in their current markets so that Nashville and Las Vegas could be the next two markets for expansion. If that doesn't happen, like I said, Portland, San Antonio, Austin, Charlotte, maybe Montreal. Those are some of the markets you might see vying for teams. Portland's tricky because the Mariners would claim territorial rights over Oregon. That would have to be settled. Montreal obviously didn't succeed the first time. Is Charlotte a major league town? We'll see. But I think by 10 years from now, there'll be 32 teams. I wouldn't be surprised. And I think definitely in 15 years, there will be.
Jared, can I interject a minute? We're at the 9 o'clock, a little bit over the 9 o'clock hour. Can you hang with us a little bit
Yes,
longer?
there's so many questions.
Yeah.
I'd
Are
like
you
to-
comfortable though? Because our
Yes.
contract was for 30 minutes. If you can hang for longer, we'd love it.
No, I'm happy to stay.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer these questions.
Okay.
My kids are sleeping and my wife is doing something else. So this
Okay.
is perfect. I'm just going to go to take these one at a time.
Sure.
In order. There's a question here about the streaming, the Peacock deal that me and my colleague Lillian and I broke the news of a couple of weeks ago. That deal has not been announced yet, but it is done. It is happening. There might be a few sort of I's and T's to cross or the contracts were all signed, but there will be streaming on Peacock this year. It will be 18 games on Sundays in a semi-exclusive time slot. Some of those games are going to start at 11:30 in the morning Eastern time. The others will start at noon, so that Peacock gets at least a little window, 90 minutes, an hour of exclusive. How significant is the added revenue? Look, there was a report by, I think, Sports Business Journal or someone like that reported it's around $115, $120 million. That and the Apple deal. Apple is doing a weekly doubleheader, Friday nights, every Friday for the whole season. But that's not new money. That's important to remember. It's not new money. ESPN used to have many of those games, and they decided not to renew for many of the games. So really what is happening here is baseball is just replacing inventory that ESPN gave up with Apple and with Peacock. Was it taking into account the final CBA? Yes. The players knew that these deals were in the works. There was not a surprise to anyone. These were things that were being worked on for a long time. These were not gigantic deals. This was not the NFL going to Amazon Prime on Thursday nights money. In the grand scheme of things, those deals were small potatoes. It's funny to say that we're talking about $120 million, but that's really the case. We'll see if it works. I mean, those are exclusive games. So if your team is playing on Apple or Peacock, it will not be on your regional sports network, on your cable package. It won't be on MLB.tv. You'll need to have those services to watch those games. Rob Manfred believes, and baseball believes, that the future is streaming and that the regional sports networks on cable are less important now than ever, and that their reach will shrink as time goes on, as more people drop cable. We'll see if they're right. Peacock and Apple are not exactly Netflix, right? Not a lot of people have them, relatively speaking. Will people subscribe to them just for baseball? I guess we'll see. I'm a little skeptical. Baseball hopes that I'm wrong. We'll find out. I know that the only reason I still have cable is so I could watch baseball. There's no other reason why I have cable. I do not watch anything else on regular TV besides sports at this point. I don't think I'm alone on that. There was a question about robot umpiring. Will it make it to the majors, the automated strike zone? Yes, there will be an automated strike zone in the major league soon. What is soon? I don't think it's going to be 2023. When I do expect there'll be a pitch timer and some of those other things. The robot strike zone is probably not exactly ready for prime time yet. I've covered some independently games where I've gone to see it in action. It's generally good. It's not perfect. There's some things that still need to be worked out. I think within the next 5 years, we will see the robot strike zone in Major League Baseball. And I know there's probably some pushback for it, that people are not going to like it. I'm sort of okay with it at this point. People talk about the human element in baseball and as a reason not to like instant replay and some of these things. My response to that personally is that I also really love the human element in baseball, but they're the players. The players are the humans. I want the players to be deciding the outcome, the action on the field, not the umpires. I really believe that the less I hear and see of umpires, the better. They should be invisible. I don't think it's a good thing that every single night when wherever Angel Hernandez is, he's trending on Twitter that night because everyone knows that he's not good. Like, I don't think that's good. I mean, Joe West is gone, but it's the same with him. The players are humans. They are great at their jobs. I want them to determine the outcome, not umpires. I do think instant replay is flawed. I think there's things about that need to be worked out, much like the robot umpire, but I'm sort of okay with it. I think we'll see it soon. There's a question about public shares. The Jacobs, when they owned the then Indians, public shares were available and the Braves are publicly owned. Any chance for teams on the Green Bay model? No, we'll never see that again, ever. The Atlanta Braves are owned by a publicly traded company, Liberty Media, which is fascinating because we get to look into their books. They're the only team whose books we get to see and how much money they really make. We'll never see that again. The teams are too expensive now. There's too many hedge fund guys. There's too much sort of like big Wall Street money in it. I don't think we'll ever see that again. Will there ever be more teams in Canada, Montreal? If there's going to be another team in Canada, it will be Montreal. I don't think that baseball views it necessarily as the best place for an expansion team. I wouldn't rule it out. There's people in Montreal that really want a team. I do think it's important to remember that while there's a lot of people nostalgic for the Expos failed. Ultimately, there's a reason why they left. Maybe if you brought a new team there, things would be different. But I understand why MLB might say, let's give another market a shot. Will realignment occur where there are 32 teams? Probably yes. And it will probably be very radical realignment. Literally like teams that have been in one league or the other for 100 years, possibly switching. We're already starting to see a world where the leagues, as we've known them, don't really matter anymore. There's no longer any difference in the rules starting this year, right? There's going to be DH in both leagues. Starting in 2023, there's going to be a more balanced schedule. Instead of the 19 games against your division rivals, that's going to be shrunk a bit. And every team is going to play every other team every year. So Cleveland will play one series against every National League team every single year, starting in 2023. So the difference between the leagues sort of doesn't really matter anymore and will sort of matter less and less as time goes on. When there's 32 teams, we'll probably see a very big realignment, probably based even more on geography. So, for example, we might see a division that's the Yankees, Mets, Red Sox, and Blue Jays, and another division that's, the Rays, the Braves, the Marlins, and the Nat, whatever. It'll be even more geographical based than now. I don't think that's happening in the next couple of years, but that's sort of a long-term plan for baseball. Thoughts about this, whether there should be a salary floor? Was it a missed opportunity? It's a very, very interesting question, a very complicated question. As we know, every other sport in baseball has every other sport besides baseball has a salary cap and a salary floor. Baseball does not. It's the closest to a free market system of all the other sports, of all the sports. There is a luxury tax, but there's no salary floor, there's no salary cap. I think it's an open question as to whether baseball players would be better off with a floor and cap. Would the industry be better from a competitive balance standpoint with a floor and cap? The problem is, in order to have a floor, you need to have a cap. You really can't have one without the other. And the players to this point have been steadfast in their refusal to have anything that's a salary cap. The reason for that is they love being able to have players sign these gigantic 10-year, $300+ million contracts. And they're, very excited for, let's say, a few years down the road, if Juan Soto has the stomach to continue year to year without signing an extension and go to free agency. If Juan Soto gets to free agency and is still as great as he'll probably be, he has a chance to sign a $500 million contract. Not exaggerating. He's going to be like 25 years old. He's going to be a free agent. I think there's a valid argument to be made that Juan Soto is the best player in baseball right now. If he's not the best player in baseball, he's in the top 3. By the time he's 25, I think there's a very good chance he'll be number 1 or number 2 and could sign a $500 million contract. The union loves that. And you only have that if you don't have a salary cap. I'm not here to say whether I agree or disagree. I don't know. I don't know what would be better off. But I think it's a valid question. And there's part of me that would love to sort of see this like alternate universe where we see baseball with a floored cap and how that changes things. Does it make it better or worse? But it's not something that we're going to see anytime soon unless really the union's priorities change dramatically. And what's my impression of Tony Clark as the players' union leader? I think the union has a better setup now than they had in 2016. In 2016, Tony Clark negotiated the CBA, went very badly for baseball, for the players. He was greatly outmatched by MLB. Tony Clark did not negotiate this deal after the last deal didn't go well. They hired a guy named Bruce Myers, of a very veteran labor attorney, to negotiate the deal. Tony Clark serves a very important role in the union. He is the executive director. He's the first former player to be the head of the players union. And as a result, he commands an incredible amount of respect from the players. He's someone that the players can relate to. They understand. He speaks their language. He knows better than any union leader ever, who knows what they are going through. That's sort of the dynamic. I think Tony Clark's fate depends on how this CBA goes. Anyone else lost audio? Did anyone else lose audio?
Nope.
Okay, sorry, Ken. I hope you got your audio back. Are there ways to improve competitive balance? Well, salary cap might actually do it, and a floor, right? Because then you wouldn't have a team like the Dodgers have a $300 million payroll and the Guardians have a $70 million payroll. Is the Guardians payroll even 70 million? What's their payroll right now? It's
50.
very low. 50. Oh my
50 or less.
Yeah, that's like unfathomable. It's tricky. Like, on the one hand, you look at that and go like, man, this is broken. Baseball's broken. On the other hand, baseball's had a different champion in 8 straight seasons. They've had more champions in the last 10 and 20 years, any of the other sports, more different teams that have won the World Series. We have seen some small market teams have success. Obviously, Tampa Bay and Oakland are the best examples of sustaining success. Cleveland obviously had a great run just a few years ago in the World Series. Sort of a real shame that they didn't win a World Series. They obviously had some really great teams in the middle of the last decade. On the other hand, the teams that win the World Series do tend to be the big market teams. Kansas City in 2015 is an exception, but for the most part, the teams that win the World Series have been teams with payrolls in sort of the top 10, top 12 in baseball. And I don't know. It's a very difficult one. Until the easiest one's a salary cap. I don't see a salary cap coming. We'll see what happens over the life of this CBA if the luxury tax rules sort of change things. At the end of the day, there's no excuse to me for a team like any team in baseball to have a $50 million payroll. I'm not saying that every team could spend like the Mets and Dodgers. I understand that there's differences in revenues, but there's no way you could tell me that the Paul Dolan can't afford a little bit more than he's spending right now, but that's just me.
So Jared, I've been holding this question off. This is a SABR meeting. On February 23rd, you wrote a very interesting article titled "A Nerdy Baseball Stat Goes Mainstream" about using WAR to help judge who gets what as far as young players, the bonus pool. How did that get in? Do you know the backdrop there? How they got the idea of using WAR? It just seems so out of left field.
I wish there was like this really sophisticated answer to that question, but it's really not. The reason they used WAR is literally because when they came up with the idea for the bonus pool, they couldn't think of anything better. So they just said, we'll just use WAR. And it was almost proposed as like a placeholder. It's like, we just want to get the idea in writing. So WAR is a good number, right? I don't really know how to calculate it, but it's fine because we'll figure it out later. And it just sort of stayed in the proposals the entire time.
Wow.
At the end of the day, they're not going to be using the publicly available WARs, which was the original proposal. They would just use like Fangraph and Baseball Reference WAR to decide who gets what in the bonus pool. The people who run those websites push back very, very hard. That's what my story was about that you're mentioning.
Yeah.
They said it's ridiculous. We don't want you using our data for this purpose. WAR is not meant to be used this way. We don't want anything to do with this. We don't want to be part of it. And not only do we not want to be part of it, it's a terrible idea. That message did sink in. And now what they are going to use some sort of WAR-like metric to help determine who gets paid what out of the bonus pool. But it's going to be a WAR metric that the union and the league are going to sort of create jointly.
Oh, wow.
So, it's going to be basically WAR, but it's not going to be Baseball Reference WAR or Fangraphs WAR. It's going to be sort of be their own version that, will it be much different than those other two? No, it's going to be sort of the same general idea, but something that they'll be able to tweak and like have the levers to, as opposed to relying on these websites to not make mistakes, to not change the formula. They do it, they negotiate it, and if they need to tweak it, they'll negotiate tweaks. So that's what they ended up deciding. So we'll call it, MLB, MLBPA WAR, MWAR. I don't know.
So they went to WAR. Now they're creating WAR is the bottom line.
Pretty much. And look, at the end of the day, yeah, that money is going to be distributed to young players based on their performance. I mean, look, at the end of the day, like we know who's going to get this bonus pool money, right? Like a guy like Corbin Burns in this new agreement would get paid based on his 2021 season. The guy just won the Cy Young. If there's a guy like Aaron Judge or Pete Alonso who had 50 homers as a rookie, they're going to get paid a little extra. You don't really need WAR to tell you that those are the guys that should be getting the payments from this pool.
Well, I think we have exhausted our questions, and I think we have thoroughly enjoyed this time with you, Jared. We hope you've enjoyed the time with us and taking away from your family. We really appreciate your time tonight.
I'm happy to do it. I hope I answered your questions and I educated, and feel free to reach out if anyone has any other thoughts.
And we'd love to have you back again in the future. We hope the door is still open for us for a return visit.
I hope so. Maybe we'll talk about the Guardians shocking the world and winning 90 games this year. That's going to happen, right?
Anything can happen. Well, thank you again, Jared, very much.
You got it. Thanks. Oh, what's my Twitter handle? I'm just at Jared Diamond, literally just my name. I saw that was a question in there. Okay. If anyone's interested.
Right.
Be well, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you. So before we bring this meeting to a close, I want to thank all of you for your attendance and your participation. I think we've had a good evening together talking baseball with some great people. Your questions were great. I would like to say that we're working on our next meeting. We're having some early stage conversation with the Akron Rubber Ducks about a face-to-face meeting like we used to do before a game, likely a Sunday game, sometime in the June-July timeframe. As we develop more of the details, we will put it out there, obviously dependent upon the COVID situation and feedback. I've gotten feedback from several of you in response to my email a while back saying we were receptive to having an appropriately planned and conducted face-to-face meeting. So that's where we are, and I will keep you up to date. But again, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a fun thing for me to put it together and talking with the three speakers, great people. And I hope you had as great a time as I did. So thank you all, and good night, and have a great evening, and stay safe.